I built a rain garden to save my home from flooding, nothing more. But the HOA treated it like a personal attack. Letters, threats, fines. Then came the EPA award, and suddenly the silence was louder than ever. For 8 quiet years, I lived in this neighborhood without a single issue, no violations, no warnings, not even a note on my door. I followed every rule, trimmed every hedge. Then one spring, I decided to replace my patchy, dying lawn with something better, something sustainable, a native rain garden. That's when everything changed. The first letter from the HOA called it unauthorized landscaping. The second one claimed it disrupted the uniform aesthetic. And by the third, they were threatening legal action over plants, over water drainage, over beauty. Behind the polite language was something nastier. They didn't like that I had done something different, something they couldn't control. But here's what they didn't realize. This wasn't just a garden, it was a certified environmental project. While they were busy counting petals and pushing fines, the EPA was watching. And they were impressed. The HOA thought they were planting fear. Instead, they grew a storm. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. The letter was brief, clipped in tone. A $50 fine for improper plant height. That's what it said. No warning, no explanation. Just a photograph of my blooming rain garden, taken from the sidewalk, and a citation code pulled from a rule book I'd never seen. I laughed it off. Surely they didn't understand what the garden was. Maybe once they realized it wasn't weeds, they'd back off. I had planted native wildflowers, not let my yard go wild. There was method to the design, science in the soil. But the next week, a second notice arrived. This one was nastier. A $200 fine for unapproved mulch material. Apparently, pine bark was out of line. They wanted dyed redwood chips, like the ones choking out every lifeless shrub in the rest of the neighborhood. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about plants. This was about power. The letters kept coming, sometimes weekly, sometimes backdated. I'd walk out in the morning to find new photographs taped to my door. Blurry shots of my garden taken in poor lighting, often with comments scrawled underneath. Overgrowth, possible mosquito hazard, or visible from street, violates landscape conformity. They even tried to label it a drainage risk, which was ironic, considering my yard had flooded every winter before the garden was installed. Now, not a drop lingered after rain. One afternoon, I caught a board member crouching behind a parked car with a measuring tape. When I opened my door and asked what she was doing, she stood up like she'd seen a ghost and muttered something about routine compliance checks. Routine, my ass. Another time, I overheard them at the mailbox pavilion. It's not even about the garden, one of them said. If we let her do this, next thing you know, people will be putting up solar panels and backyard chickens. This isn't a hippie commune. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was targeted suppression. But here's what they didn't realize. I had already started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every photo. I kept timestamps, scanned the envelopes, even filmed a few late-night drive-bys when I noticed headlights sweeping my windows a little too often. The more they pushed, the more I dug in. And the rain garden? It flourished. Pollinators came back. The soil stayed cool during the heat wave. My water bill dropped. I even caught 2 local science teachers stopping by with students to show them how natural filtration worked. I didn't advertise it, but word got around, and that only made the HOA angrier. They started accusing me of violating bylaws I'd never heard of. One claimed I had planted non-native invasive species, which was laughable, considering I had sourced every seed from the state's Department of Conservation list. Another cited a policy from 1997 that stated lawns must be green, uniform, and sod-based. Sod-based, as if grass was some kind of holy standard. Then came the door knock. It was mid-afternoon. I was working from home when someone rapped on the door like they were there for a police raid. It was a board member, Harold, the guy with mirrored sunglasses and an ego bigger than his SUV. He didn't even say hello. He just looked past me, over my shoulder at the garden, and said, "This isn't a swamp zone. If you don't fix it, we will." I didn't answer. I just closed the door. Because by then, I'd realized something else. The HOA wasn't just afraid of change. They were terrified of losing control. The garden was never the real issue. It was the symbol. A symbol that said you could do things differently. That beauty didn't have to be boxed, uniform, and chemically fertilized. That someone could resist and still thrive. And that idea, that scared them, so I went deeper. So I went. I filed public records request for the HOA's meeting minutes. I reviewed their violation logs and found something wild. Over 60% of citations over the past year had been issued to homes on my street. The majority of them? Women homeowners, many of them single. Most of them, like me, had made even minor changes that challenged the neighborhood aesthetic, pattern, motive, paper trail. This wasn't a simple case of overzealous rule enforcement. This was targeted enforcement, possibly discriminatory. I called a friend who worked in environmental law. She told me to keep documenting, to keep collecting. She said something that stuck with me. You don't need to fight them in the dirt. You just need to let them bury themselves in their own paper trail. And so I waited. Let the garden bloom. Let them keep digging. Because the moment was coming when someone bigger than them would notice. And that's when everything would change. 3 months. That's how long it took. 3 months of silence, of fines piling up, of passive-aggressive neighbor glances, of carefully documented retaliation tactics by the HOA. And then, out of nowhere, I got the email. Subject line, EPA Urban Greening Nominee, congratulations. I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The Environmental Protection Agency, the federal EPA, had reviewed my rain garden submission and chosen it as one of their national nominees for stormwater resilience and native biodiversity integration. Out of hundreds of entries, mine had stood out. The words hit harder than any HOA letter ever could. Your project demonstrates a proactive, sustainable model for future urban neighborhoods. We commend your efforts in restoring ecological balance in residential zones. I didn't scream. I didn't dance. I just stared at the screen, smiling. Then I forwarded it. No message, no subject line, just the email. I sent it directly to the HOA board's contact address, the one that usually replied within hours, sometimes minutes, with reminders and warnings. But this time, nothing. No reply that day or the next. Not even a cold, automated, "Thank you for your submission." Just silence. Thick, stifling silence. For the first time in this entire ordeal, they didn't know how to respond. And I wasn't done. A week later, the EPA asked if they could visit the property. I said yes, obviously. They showed up with clipboards and cameras, taking notes, asking technical questions. Real questions, not the kind the HOA liked to throw around to sound important. They asked about soil types, slope gradients, and water retention rates. They noticed pollinators, microhabitats. One even asked if I'd consider consulting on similar projects. I told them I'd think about it. After the site visit, I got a formal letter, signed and sealed, confirming the nomination and inviting me to a regional environmental leadership summit. My rain garden was now officially a federal-level case study in sustainable design, and that's when I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. I hadn't shown up in months. I'd stayed quiet, patient. Let them play their games while I gathered my ammunition. But now I had something they couldn't ignore. When I walked into that room, the mood shifted. Karen, the HOA president, was mid-sentence, going on about grass height regulations, until she saw me standing in the back. She paused. A few heads turned. Some whispered. I waited for the open forum. Then I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "I'd like to formally read a letter I received from the United States Environmental Protection Agency." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't grandstand. I just read it, word for word. The room got quieter with every line. By the time I got to the phrase "Model for National Ecological Standards," you could hear a pin drop. When I finished, I looked straight at Karen. She didn't blink. Her mouth was pressed so tightly it looked like a single line drawn in panic. That moment, that was the shift. The next day, the fines disappeared. Every violation, every citation, gone. No explanation, no apology. Just erased from the ledger like it had never happened. And then came the most telling moment of all. I received a thank you letter from the HOA, a generic, barely sincere note thanking me for beautifying the community in a way that has received positive attention. Positive attention. That's what they cared about. Not the plants, not the water, not the impact. Just the fact that someone else with more authority had praised it, and now they had to pretend they supported it all along. But I wasn't fooled, and I wasn't finished, because now I had something they never expected: leverage. The EPA wasn't just a trophy, it was a spotlight. And under that spotlight, their dirty tactics started to look exactly like what they were: small, bitter, and very possibly unlawful. I started pulling threads, looking deeper into the HOA's practices, gathering stories from other neighbors who had been fined for equally ridiculous violations. What I found wasn't just a pattern, it was a system built to control through fear, intimidation, and selective enforcement. They thought they were policing a flower bed. They didn't realize they were standing on a landmine. And with the EPA behind me, I was ready to make sure it went off. The EPA didn't just visit, they documented everything: photos, measurements, even drone footage. They interviewed me about native plant selection, stormwater redirection, and soil composition. But more than anything, they listened. And that alone felt like a revolution, because after months of being spoken at by the HOA, here was an institution that cared not about uniformity, but about impact. 2 weeks later, the article went live. A full-feature write-up on the EPA's website: a backyard solution to urban stormwater, one homeowner's victory for nature. My little garden was now national news. Environmental forums shared it. A few urban planners reached out. A school asked to use it in their curriculum. But back in the neighborhood, the HOA said nothing. No congratulatory note, no newsletter mention, just silence. Tighter, colder than before. Like they were trying to pretend none of it had happened. Like they hoped ignoring me might make me disappear. They underestimated me again. See, while they'd spent months weaponizing rules and digging up nonsense policies, I'd spent that same time building a case, carefully, relentlessly. Every email, every letter, every fine logged, recorded, categorized. And now I was done playing defense. I submitted a formal complaint. Not to the HOA, of course. I went to the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. I outlined everything: the fines based on fabricated violations, the surveillance, the sudden targeting once the rain garden went in, the comments about swamp zones and neighborhood aesthetics. But the part that caught their attention? I called it what it really was: ecological sabotage. They tried to force me to destroy a sustainable landscape that actively prevented flooding and promoted biodiversity after it had been recognized by a federal agency. And that wasn't just petty. That was obstruction. That was hostile environmental action. That was enforceable. And it stuck. An investigator was assigned to the HOA. Not just my case, all of them. It turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been harassed for making unauthorized improvements. A neighbor had added a compost bin and received a fine. Another had tried xeriscaping to save water and was told their rocks were off-brand. Patterns emerged, patterns with consequences. It didn't take long after that. Karen, the queen bee herself, the HOA president, who had once laughed while handing me a citation, resigned quietly. No statement, no public farewell. Just a sudden agenda note before the next meeting. Leadership transition. 1 minute she was running the board like a private kingdom. The next she was gone. I didn't show up to that meeting. I didn't need to. My point had been made. Instead, I stayed home. I took the first violation letter they ever sent me, the one about unauthorized plant height, and framed it right next to the EPA award plaque. Two sides of the same story, one powered by fear, the other by science, one rooted in control, the other in growth. It made me laugh sometimes, looking at the two of them together. How a few wildflowers and some gravel could threaten an entire institution. But here's the thing they never understood. It was never just about the garden. It was about the right to change, the right to improve, the right to care about the land beneath your feet without being punished for not following outdated, aesthetic-driven rules written by people more obsessed with uniformity than sustainability. They thought they were dealing with a rule breaker. What they got was a rule rewriter. Now, the HOA board is reviewing its landscaping policy, which is code for scrambling to save face. Several neighbors have started rain gardens of their own. One even asked if I'd help them design it. And me? I'm considering starting a consulting side gig. Why not? But I'll tell you the real win. It's the way the street smells after a fresh rain. Earthy, clean, alive. It's watching bees and butterflies return to a place once choked by chemicals and conformity. It's knowing that for every inch they tried to take back, I gave nature a mile. And it's remembering that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's blooming in silence, while the people who tried to destroy you fade into it. My rain garden still blooms, stronger than ever. The soil is rich, the roots run deep, and the pollinators return like clockwork. The HOA, strangely quiet. No more letters, no more threats. Just silence, like they finally realized they picked the wrong battle. And the neighborhood? Funny how things change. A few of the same neighbors who once side-eyed my yard are now asking how to start their own rain gardens. One even called mine inspiring. But just when I thought it was over, when I finally felt like peace had settled in, I found something in my mailbox. No return address, no signature, just a folded note with 7 words. This isn't over. You'll regret everything. Karen's name wasn't on it, but it didn't have to be. So now I'm watching, waiting, because if she wants to play again, I'm ready. What's the craziest thing your HOA has done? Tell me in the comments. Trust me, I've got more stories to tell. And if you thought this one was wild, wait until you hear how they tried to ban solar panels. Like, subscribe and buckle up, because we're just getting started.